That's, at least I did something.
It's working.
Yes. Oh, yes. You can definitely hear me now. That's good. Okay, let's quieten down, everyone. Let's enjoy this session. Another, again, a variety of speakers, everyone with very interesting insights and ideas. We should all be personally invested in an Africa which is highly innovative and has its climate solutions accelerated. This session is going to be split up into different themes. First of all, we'll be exploring what really is holding back innovation. Where are the opportunities to amplify and scale up innovations that already exist and create new momentum? What specific support is needed to enable African solution providers to get plugged into an international network of incubators and innovation hubs? And we'll take a glimpse into the future and think about how we create this net zero vision that everyone is talking about. Okay, and I'd like to stress once again, everyone be as candid and straight talking as possible. Solutions focused questions. Okay, who we got up here? First of all, from Kenya CIC, which is an organization of consultancy and providing consultancy and advisory services. You've worked closely with Climate-KIC, the co-host of this session, and helped launch new adaptation and resilience hub for African entities earlier this year. Prabhakar Vanam. Prabhakar, welcome. From Sabon, you heard her earlier on a panel about female entrepreneurship. You have your own startup. Is it still a startup? No. Okay, African company. Audrey Darko. Audrey, welcome. Previously ambassador of Ireland to Sierra Leone and Liberia, and now the head of Irish Aid. And then the head of Irish Aid in both countries. Oh, look at her studying my introduction. Am I going to get it right? Okay. You're climate director at Ireland's Department of Foreign Affairs. Sinead Walsh. Co-founder of Ambo Ventures, a VC firm investing in Africa's leading entrepreneurs tackling climate change. Jade Bouhmouch. Jade, welcome. Wonderful. And we're also joined by Joshua Murima, who is going to kick off our session with a short reflection on hot off-the-presses report, Adapt, Mitigate and Grow, Climate Tech Innovation in Africa. From Briter Bridges, Joshua Murima. Joshua, welcome. Okay, we're running a little bit behind time, so let's jump straight in. Joshua, why don't you give us some of the highlights from that report?
Thanks so much for the introductions.
And please, yeah, great. Please speak up, because it's very noisy over here.
Super. It's great to join this discussion, and I'll just start by setting the scene a bit, sharing some insights that we managed to deduce from our partnership with Climate-KIC. Now, my name is Josh, as introduced. I come from Briter, and Briter has been on a mission to showcase emerging technologies and nascent economies across the world. Climate technologies are some of these emerging technologies that are of key focus to our mission. And it is great to actually dive deeper and as part of this partnership, be able to map the climate tech ecosystem in Africa. Now, there is this old or ongoing saying that it takes an ecosystem to actually build a startup, right? So the first thing that I want to mention is that there is a central importance that is brought about by partnerships, right? Partnerships between different ecosystem stakeholders. So from the private sector, and to be particular, early stage innovators operating with this private sector sort of economy. Then you have investors, from VCs to DFIs, Jade is in the room, all the way to regulators and other stakeholders, including supporters, ecosystem supporters, ASOs, incubators, and accelerators. So there is a need for a concerted effort and partnerships to help catalyze the contribution that early stage innovators can make to either, help in mitigating or adapting to, the effects of climate change. Secondly, there is a growing interest, of course, in climate tech investments, and solar energies has been a leader in this. So from mini grids to large scale solar farms to solar home systems. However, there's some gaps that exist with regards to support and the deployment of capital and resources to much more earlier technologies, right? So, quite a number of early stage innovators are facing challenges in accessing funding to support the ventures, in the sense that, close to more than 440 million has been raised by climate tech startups from the period from 2015 to the Q1 of 2022, and this represents 167 climate tech companies, right? But this is only 14% of the total funding to digital and green ventures in Africa, right? Which also means that there is a substantial sort of gap that goes to early stage innovators within climate tech itself, so that 77% of this funding has only gone to solar sort of energy companies, right? So there is a need to support much more emerging technologies, from EVs to others like clean cooking solutions, etc. Then we also gather that there's been a focus by government and indeed a larger subset of private sector towards the mega projects within this whole mission around climate resilience and mitigation, right? So again, there is a need to sort of catalyze the position and the impact by small scale and early stage tech innovations. Also, we note an improvement in sort of regulation, but these improvements have not been constant across the continent, right? So there are still regulatory hurdles for climate tech solutions. Some countries within the continent are much more advanced than others. So there is a need for sort of equalized, inclusive growth in terms of just dialogue around regulation.
Super. Thank you very much, Joshua, for giving us a good foundation to build from there. Some really interesting stats there. I said we'd go straight into talking about the obstacles holding back further innovation. But actually, I want to pick up on something you just said, Joshua. About 75% of the climate tech companies which are being funded are in solar, right? So, Jade, you're a VC. Are you part of the problem here? Are you also? What's your funding portfolio like? Is it mainly solar as well?
It's a great question. No, actually, we are actually actively excluding these kinds of kind of energy-oriented kind of investments. And actually, this is actually a critical aspect that was actually talked about, right? If we can invest into more innovative, essentially technologies, essentially areas like EV, areas like effectively plastic replacement, right? Essentially, plastic is used all over the continent, and we invested into a company in Egypt, actually, which has developed effectively a plastic that is entirely effectively compostable, biodegradable, uses no petrochemicals, and it's cheaper than plastic. There are innovators like this in so many different effectively areas who essentially, to the point that's made, struggle to get access to capital because they don't plug into kind of a neat, essentially impact kind of model or kind of a neat kind of understanding of what essentially clean tech means. And that's an area that we're actively trying to invest much more in because that's where ultimately we believe the opportunity is.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, thank you very much, Jade. Sinead, you've been working in and around African countries for quite a while. Joshua is quite optimistic and positive about the developments. Is that something that you also you see? Let's try that mic. Try the ones right in front of you. No. Okay. Let's try no.
I hope this still works.
This is working.
Okay, we have two. No, thanks a lot. Yeah, I think there's reasons to be optimistic about this space. I mean, I suppose we're coming from a different point of view to a VC in the sense that we're a public organization. So that gives us maybe some advantages, some disadvantages in terms of what we can do. But I think what we're doing with Climate-KIC, we're pretty happy about in the sense that, you know, we work very strongly in climate adaptation and a little bit like, you know, what we heard, you know, in terms of the extreme dependence on or the extreme investment in solar versus other things. We see that in general in the climate space, right? That most investment is going into mitigation and very little in adaptation. So we're actually supporting Climate-KIC to have these, you know, these entrepreneur kind of competitions and the support to startups specifically for adaptation and resilience in Africa. And I think we're pretty happy with how that's going. Coming back to kind of what makes a public body a bit different. I mean, we do need to think about sort of governance and these kinds of things, maybe more than some others. And so, one of the things we like in this program, well, in fact, in all of the programs we have at Climate-KIC, is that there is this sort of training that comes along with it. And so things like governance and financial management, which depending on, I suppose, how startups start, they may or may not be strong in that area, but that's quite important to us. So I think, you know, I suppose we're not private sector people, frankly. It's not our area of expertise. So we really kind of learn, I suppose, from the expertise, you know, because we believe that the climate space needs an enormous amount more private sector input, right? I don't think anybody thinks that there's enough finance within governments and public bodies. But at the same time, how do we help you on the private sector side to do more of what you want to do, and how do we kind of learn from your expertise, even though we may have some risks which you might be able to take that we might not be able to take, but still I think there's a way in which we can complement each other, and we're starting to do that more and more.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Again, this doesn't work, right? Oh, it's working? It's kind of working. Okay. Oh, it's working. Thank you very much, Sinead. Talking about what kind of support you can give, let's figure out some of the obstacles which are in place, which are holding back innovation. And something else that Joshua said was imagine technologies. I love that term. You know, these things don't exist yet. We need to create them. And isn't that one of the things holding back investment, is that Africa is often seen as a marketplace and not as a fertile ground for ideas. What do you think?
Great
Prabhakar.
question. Thank you so much for that question, and thank you for having me on this panel. Now let me take that question a bit towards the development stages, if I may say so. When we started, Africa is, when people think of Africa, people think of conflicts, people think of governance, people think of corruption, people think of various other things. But today, the landscape is slowly changing. Just recently, a week ago, I think, Kenya celebrated the first anniversary of Google Development Center in Kenya. So these were the concepts which was absolutely non-existent. So the landscape is changing, but the conflicts, the obstacles are many, because we are talking about some years of conflicts, some years of problems, and years of non-actions, which has resulted in the way what we are seeing right now. While Silicon Valleys are moving ahead and coming up with some blockchain kind of technologies, we are still at a very nascent basic stage of providing some IT solutions, technology solutions, and trying to give the awareness to the farmers, to the SMEs, that these technologies play an important role in ensuring their products and services will have better value propositions.
And just why are we still at such a basic stage, though? Whose fault is that? Is that an African problem? Is that an international problem that they see Africa as a marketplace instead of this place for ideas?
Well, when we see African, there are two ways to look at it. The innovations that are happening in Africa are being looked at as a local solutions rather than a solution which has a very big idea towards it, which can also provide solutions to, say, for example, a Europe, an America, or whoever that is. As long as there is that particular problem, the African innovation ecosystem has what it takes to kind of provide those solutions to wherever it is. Right now, many of the market space in Africa is more seen as how me and my company can promote my products and services in Africa rather than the other way around. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
So the African innovator or African entrepreneur is merely seen as a product or as a marketplace for somebody who has a solution, especially in the European land or in the American space or something like that. That narrative has to change.
Okay, we have an African entrepreneur in our midst, Audrey. Do you feel like you're just a market? You represent just a marketplace for ideas rather than, being able to attract investment because you're just running a fantastic company and maybe it's going to spread like globally?
Certainly not. We're not just a market.
Speak.
You can hear it?
Yeah.
All right,
just
great.
talk louder.
Right. So certainly not. I definitely don't think Africa is just a marketplace. For a lot of technology companies that are coming out of Africa, I think it's first of all solving a pressing need. Africa has a lot of gaps that needs to be filled, first of all, before maybe looking outside of the continent. So I do agree with you. A lot of the solutions are local, but they're important. They're essential because Africa needs to fill the void prior to looking outside of the continent. But then I think the approach, like you're saying, should definitely have attached to it the global lens or the global kind of thinking, the systems, the design of it, so that it can be applicable and replicable across other African countries and then other continents. But I definitely feel that, is a yes or no question, I definitely feel that it's not just a marketplace. It should definitely start local.
Okay.
And then it should nurture its land and its soil. Because from there, it helps with the mindset shift and how other solutions can be born out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. To fill those gaps, though, a lot of companies will need funding to just explore business cases and the possibilities. Do VCs like you, Jade, are you open to bridging that funding gap? Because often private finance, they want proven track records for the people that the organizations they're going to back. How does that through which lens are VCs looking at opportunities in Africa?
Yeah, there's a couple of different lenses, and there's a couple of different styles of investor, I guess. You have kind of the more private equity style investor who is looking to have that kind of a track record. When you're talking about early stage investors and quite a lot of the others who we essentially co-invest with, as well as us, we actually have experience on the continent, or we actually believe in the opportunities on the continent. I also would like to distinguish between local investors and then kind of international investors who decide to come into the continent. Local investors, and Ambo is ultimately kind of like a local investment firm. We understand that actually innovating in Kenya is very different to innovating in Egypt, but both places are very difficult places to be able to create a startup. I'm sure all the entrepreneurs who are potentially in the room will kind of agree. It's hard to build companies in Africa. And yet, when we look at the opportunity, if you understand the ecosystem, if you understand what it takes, if you've actually done it before, or you've invested in people who've done it before, it's not as daunting as we may think. And our investment structure is to actually take earlier stage investments, take a more hands-on approach, support entrepreneurs in actually closing that gap. We are not afraid of that early stage risk. One of the challenges, though, is that local investors and actual African entrepreneurs tend to get a very small proportion of the capital that's essentially coming into the continent as a whole, unfortunately, right? Only about 20% of all the capital that actually comes into the continent actually goes to local entrepreneurs today, for now. This is a problem that we have to tackle. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to back more local investors, right? Local investors have local networks, have local competence, understand what it takes to do business in these markets, and aren't afraid of that early stage risk. So ultimately, if we're trying to tackle this problem in a meaningful way, let's actually back more local founders and let's back more local investors.
Thank you very much. Sinead, is that something donors like you could help with? If only 20% of international money is from the private finance world is going to local
Yeah, that's a very shocking statistic, but I think it's good to know that. I mean, I think that is the kind of thing that we are doing and can do more of, in the sense that, you know, we don't have shareholders that are holding us to, you know, kind of very, you know, strict kind of profit considerations, which I guess is an issue for a lot of the private investors, although maybe not all. We do need to prove, you know, public good. We need to prove, you know, sort of relevance to the kind of burning issues that we're involved in on the African continent, including obviously on climate adaptation. But I think we can and do afford to give people, you know, a chance, to give people training in that early stage. And as I say, we do that through Climate-KIC, because simply we wouldn't have the expertise to do it ourselves. But
how flexible is that term, public good? I mean, is that enough to finance to help an Audrey, for instance?
Well, I don't know enough about what Audrey does yet, but maybe if Audrey tells us. I mean, you know, I think, like, yeah, we're fairly strict on the public good, right? But I mean, there's a lot that falls into that. So at the moment, we focus a lot, as I said, on sort of adaptation and resilience. In the Pacific, we're funding, you know, programs that relate around oceans work, for example. But I suppose more broadly, I'm just talking about the climate work. I mean, more broadly, we do have funding to the private sector, you know, in agriculture, for example. We were just talking about it earlier with Prabhakar. Like in Kenya, we're supporting, you know, sort of, you know, building up some aspects of the Kenyan agriculture industry as well. So, so I think there's quite a bit of scope, but yeah, it definitely needs to have a social benefit. But again, you know, as I said earlier, if you know, aid money like, you know, we have was going to solve Africa's problems, then we would have done that a long time ago, right? I mean, we desperately need the private sector. The private sector will be far more, and has been, you know, I can say in my own country, far more a driver of change than any external assistance, although we also had times of getting external assistance ourselves from the European Union. But that will never be enough. And so it is for us, I suppose, how we play to our strengths. But I would say from the Irish perspective, and not all donors are the same, we're a pretty flexible donor, and as long as we can be convinced that, you know, these are our sort of, you know, good ideas, these are our sort of honest brokers, and there is a public good, then I think we are maybe more flexible than maybe some private finance can be, in terms of that immediate need to show profit. But again, as I say, I know there are private investors as well who have that flexibility more and more, and some philanthropists and so on. Yeah. But on the public side, that's maybe something we can add. Yeah.
Okay, clear. Prabhakar, you guys were talking before about agricultural startups in Kenya. Can you perhaps share a success story?
We are in the business of providing support to startups. So there is one company called Mionga Fresh. We are supported over 2,000 enterprises. Just to pick up one example, there's a company called Mionga Fresh, which talks about exotic food saplings, climate resilient seedlings as well. So when she came into our office, she was struggling in terms of how to put across the idea. And she was looking at a very small access to finance, a $10,000 grant, so that she can put some basic infrastructure and also do some little bit of program with the farmer outgrowers kind of a thing. And unfortunately, the startup ecosystem in Africa is not so developed. Of course, it has grown rapidly, but it is not at a stage where you can just walk into some kind of a funding agency and get some funding to it, even though the idea is brilliant. So after a lot of rejections, KCIC did support her. And right now, she's one of the, she won all kind of awards, Entrepreneur of the Year award. She got some fantastic funding from AFDB. And recently, I think it was USAID who looked at their business model and provided a loan of $1 million so that she can grow her business much beyond Kenya, because the need of that particular product is it's drought resilient, it's grown with very little water consumption. Climate takes into climate adaptation into perspective. So those are the few of the enterprises that we have, whom we have been supporting and who are thriving with basic support of bit of financing. But more than financing, it's about business advisory services. It's about providing the access to information, access to facilities, and more importantly, everybody has been speaking about here, it's about creating an enabling environment so that the policy issues doesn't become an impediment, rather that it becomes a facilitative process for the entrepreneurs to grow.
Okay, let's build on that idea of what the kind of architecture needs to be in place in order, this enabling environment, in order to build from that. Let me bring in Joshua again. Joshua, from that report, for instance, what are you hearing? What are your ideas about the kind of architecture that's now in place, the framework that companies are having to work with? Can we build from there, from a systems point of view, or do new things need to be put in place in order to really release the potential?
Right. I mean, thanks for that question. What we saw is that, from all the conversations that we had with innovators, that, a one size does not, definitely fit all, right? Climate innovators in Kenya work with different scenarios to those in Egypt, different climate scenarios to all other countries as well. In as much as innovation, the climate innovation in Kenya is much more sort of advanced than other African countries. That should not really be used as the gold standard and the example for the design of interventions all across the continent. But that being said, there is a need for specialized support towards climate tech innovators. KCIC, I know, is one of them that are specialized towards these green sectors. But there is a need to catalyze kind of the presence of such institutions across the continent. I mean, just comparing it to the likes of fintech, there are quite a number of fintech accelerators, incubators, corporates and private sector sort of goodwill to get into the sector, because they are sort of already proven business cases, right, to invest and support ventures coming out from that sector, right? But that is different to clean tech. There is also sort of this need to build this knowledge, body of knowledge and data to again provide that backing as to why more interventions are needed, more funding is needed for early stage climate tech.
Let me bring in Audrey here. Joshua talks about the need for specialized support, but funders, I can't imagine that's a very popular term for funders, because they want to be able to just roll out a standard form contract. They want the people they're giving money to, the organizations, to have proven track records. What has your experience been when trying to raise money?
It's challenging to raise money, especially on the continent. You definitely grapple with a lot. but my experience has been to leverage on partnerships to actually thrive and succeed. Aside, the usual typical speaking to investors or, donor funds or development agencies that want to support what you're doing. But for us, at Sabon Sake, regen agriculture, as well as we are the nexus of regenerative agriculture and carbon financing for farming communities. We've just leveraged on partnerships to actually thrive and stay afloat. And what that means is identifying organizations that have aligned objectives with us, striking conversations with them, building that relationship with them, sharing the concept, the knowledge about what we are doing, our impact, reporting on that, and then creating pilot projects with them to actually scale across the various communities we work with. That's been our approach, to be honest. With investors as well, we're currently in queue to do that. But once you're already piloting, you're playing around what it means to actually scale from one community to another. It's very easy to speak with an investor and share with them what the economic viability is, not just for the company or for them, but also for the community that you're working in. So
and
that's it.
I see you nodding profusely there, Jade.
Yeah, I mean, most African countries and effectively culture and ultimately community, right? What we have that is particularly powerful is our sense of community as well, right?
So can you try speaking up? Yeah, let's go for that.
Is this kind of like a little better?
Yep, go for it.
Great. We have communities all across the continent who are actively trying to tackle a number of challenges that are overlapping. That partnerships approach is absolutely brilliant and extremely intelligent, right? I mean, it's exactly what's needed to be able to actually develop the kinds of initial, effectively kind of a proof of concept that tells investors and others that yes, this is actually kind of a real thing, right? Even if they're not specialists in this particular space or in this particular country. It also aligns to kind of what I would propose is a little bit of a different reality, right? Which is that even as investors, we need to do a better job of actually bringing in others in the community, right? We as investors can no longer be kind of okay just offering a check, right? And basically telling the entrepreneur, okay, good luck, go for it, right? We need to actually stay involved. We need to bring in other investors, donors, grantors, other types of capital, customers and others, right? If you're gonna build something on the continent, it's hard enough. You need people who are gonna help you. The last element that I just wanted to add just on what potentially needs to change is our own perception of ourselves. We still think that we are not good enough. We still think that we do not have the capability to innovate. We still think that we are at this nascent stage where like nothing that we do can compare to what's happening in the West or in the rest of the world. And that's simply not true, right? We have entrepreneurs who are developing extraordinary technological innovations. We have entrepreneurs who are doing really cutting edge work. And we need to be able to develop an environment that actually kind of enables them to actually believe in themselves and to not be effectively put down because they're looked at as kind of too ambitious or kind of other dreamers. So we have to believe in ourselves as well. And our governments and others have to believe in us.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Jay. There's a real battle cry for African creativity and energy and entrepreneurship. Brilliant. Thank you very much. In terms of creating that environment, Sinead, what parts of the entrepreneurship process, which parts of it does Irish Aid finance, for instance, and donors in general?
Well, donors in general, we could be here all day. I mean, I think in terms of what we do, it is we're not a huge country, right? So we whenever we're choosing what to fund, we try to see if we can be quite targeted. And I think in terms of what we're doing with this private sector innovation work, a lot of it is quite early stage, kind of bringing in the ideas and then doing the kind of, and when I say doing, this is through the partners, right, like Climate-KIC, but funding the, the training and the mentorship for people to kind of get to the next stage. I think that's where we are. There was just I think there's been a few sort of interesting things that I've been thinking about. I mean, one is this point about the investors, needing to sort of be more involved and to reach out. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do in Tanzania is bringing together, researchers, companies, the government itself, to kind of look at the, I suppose the ecosystem is the new word, right? But to look at the whole picture. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. But the other point, though, I wanted to come back to is the enabling environment, because a lot of donors have spent a lot of money over the years working on enabling environment, and I'm not necessarily sure that it's worked all that well, and maybe some of you who are coming to it from the other side can say a bit more. But I think countries have to get the legislation right, and I think one thing that, I'm talking domestically here, but one thing that Ireland has done quite well over the years is create an enabling environment and a sort of, and help our companies to grow and expand globally.
Can you give some concrete examples of what's gone wrong in terms of trying to create an enabling
Well, I don't really know, because it's not, I'm not an expert in this. I just know there's so much, and maybe Prabhakar, you might have a better sense, but when I think about, say, Sierra Leone, and I think about friends of mine who are in the business sector there, when the interest rate you're getting from the bank is 28, 29%, I mean, where do you, how do you even start? And I think there's, there's a lot of work that has gone into maybe policies, but that's fine. But if the interest rate is 28% and the policies are beautiful, the interest rate is still 28%. So I suppose, it's and again, there's a lot of people who know a lot more about this than I do, but it's just sort of taking that step back and saying, okay, what are the real constraints for companies? What are companies saying are the constraints, rather than just sort of looking and saying, well, we have this nice law in my country, so you should have the same nice law in your country. I will say legislation is important, and that's been one of the things that my country has, I think, gotten pretty right over the years. But that doesn't mean that I can just transfer that to other countries. So I think maybe it is the point about sort of consulting with the private sector and saying, what are your real, actual day-to-day obstacles, which may not be the ones which are part of the official narrative, and how can we help with that?
Yeah. Prabhakar, do you want to elaborate on?
Well, I think you're right, Sunday. I mean, there are a lot of problems with policy, for lack of it, and there are some policies which are so obsolete that, they have to be absolutely gone. Just to give you a couple of examples, if I'm a startup, I have this idea, and I want to set up an organization in any of the countries in Africa. Look at my single window systems. How complex are they? How many government offices do I need to run into to get my licenses in place? And by the time I come to the end of that cycle, my 9 months are gone. And my idea might be seasonal idea. It might be linked to a rain today. It might be linked to a sunshine tomorrow. So I cannot be held accountable for running around the government offices, and especially if it is a startup, if it is even more complex. That's number one. Number two, let me also give you another example of how policies can actually aid the ecosystem. There is the Central Bank of Kenya came up with a new regulation saying that, all the financial institutions need to be climate resilient. They have to incorporate ESG principles within their lending mechanisms. So what that has done is all the banks are now looking at their portfolio to convert into a more greener portfolio. which means I'm not just funding a cement factory, I'm not just funding a factory which doesn't include ESG. It is making mandatory, the banks are making mandatory for companies to embed the ESG principles within their day-to-day operations. They're not saying we are not going to fund you because you don't have ESG. No. But banks are saying we will provide you the loan provided you incorporate some kind of mitigation policies, some kind of adaptation policies within your processes going forward. So in that sense, you are making your portfolio more greener, and that's the power of the policy. If you are able to make those proactive policies, you are able to create a better ecosystem for sure.
Okay, clear. Thank you very much. We're drawing towards the end of the session. I'd love to end with something Cassia did in a previous session, talking about what things people should stop doing, start doing, and continue doing. Sinead, from the perspective of donors, what would you say? And let's be provocative about this. What should donors stop doing, start doing, and continue doing in order to accelerate the growth and impact of local entrepreneurs in Africa?
Yeah, I suppose, coming back to what we were just saying, if we want to work on the enabling environment, we just need to make sure that we're talking to the private sector at all levels as well, not just a few top companies and sort of saying, what are your problems? We want to help with those, but talking to different levels of the private sector in different sectors, and make sure that, some of these issues like Prabhakar is talking about, licensing and so on, that may only affect the smaller companies, who have less resources, but to make sure that they are coming into the mix of whatever we're trying to do in terms of the enabling environment. In terms of what donors should start doing, I suppose flexibility is quite key, and patience, and making sure that we recognize that capacity building is a really big part of this, right? Especially if we're looking at innovations, which we are, that are going to have impact on, at the community level and social benefit and all this kind of stuff. We can't assume that all of this just, comes all ready to go. And maybe if it's ready to go, then it can go to the private investors anyway, and then it doesn't need the public money. So I think we need to have the patience and the flexibility to sort of support the capacity that can then lead to the innovations, and then later on, obviously, to the profitability and the self-sustainability, but not necessarily expecting that from day one.
Yep, Prabhakar, go ahead. We've got to keep it brief, unfortunately.
Well, three things really. First is that the localized
Talk
solutions.
from a private sector point of view. What should the private sector be doing?
The first thing is the localized solutions, promote more local solutions, even though they are addressing the local challenges. But how do we upscale it? How do we take it to a next level kind of a thing with additional financing, additional support, additional business advisory services, whatever is needed? I think that is something that we need to do to ensure the local solutions just doesn't remain a localized solution, but also is scaling up. That's number one. Number two, it's more about implementation. I mean, the climate negotiators out there in one of the rooms here, thinking about the difference between the planning and the implementation. So I guess we need to get on with the implementation, rolling of the sleeves kind of a thing, and do the hard things. Even though it is hard, it will give you a fantastic results. The third thing is the program design itself. The way the programs are being right now designed, it's slightly easier approach rather than what is needed approach. So I think we need to embed what is needed, especially from the enterprises point of view, especially from the innovators point of view, and the DNAs of these programs should be, how do we convert these innovators to a sustainable entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so really embrace the systems approach, basically. Really look closely. Okay, Audrey, what should local entrepreneurs stop doing? What should they start doing? And what's good? What should they continue doing?
I think we should be honest about the reality on the ground, the harsh realities, and in terms of what are the problems. that communities or the customers that we are providing all these innovations for are facing, right? And that means for us that we need to understand the culture, really understand what exactly is the context, and go with that instead of the generic themes or ideas that maybe this problem matters more than the other. What exactly, let's be honest, what exactly is the harsh reality for the customer?
Okay, so that's
or
what
the
local
community?
entrepreneurs should start
Exactly.
doing. Okay.
And then the last bit I'd say is with the economic viability. I feel that the power should be moving away from like the government and from the government to the community and the private sectors in terms of accelerating climate and net zero on the continent, such that if the community or the customers understand the economic viability for themselves, they're the ones that start to champion it or insist on having it as a solution for them. So in that sense, they kind of catalyze the way the solution scales across. And then the last thing is collaboration. I think that's something as innovators, local entrepreneurs should look at. Look at partners that really are aligned and have interactions and then establish relationships with them to enable us be sustainable.
Okay, clear. Thank you very much. We've kind of let go of the stop, start, and continue thing. But anyway, Jade, what should VCs stop, start, and continue doing? Very, very briefly.
Yes. Stop effectively trading off more extensive, essentially DD, or excessively high standards with kind of like as opposed to investing into meaningfully helping entrepreneurs to tackle the risks. I think we trade off this idea that we have more due diligence that takes 2 months. And in actuality, what we need is do the right level of DD and then move on.
Okay, wonderful, Jade. And Joshua, I'm so sorry, we've got no time. We've run over by 6 minutes. But thank you very much to all of our guests for joining in, and thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.